Hi everybody, Culturist John here. In this video we're going to take a fun journey through Western Culturist art history. And you might think, oh my god, I'm into politics, we have to save the West. What has art history got to do with that? Everything. Art history tells us our story, it tells us who we are. Now, to do this we're going to review one book, Glittering Images by Paglia. And in general, I love Paglia. Her relentless takedown of feminism and outrageous style make her a great academic to watch. But this book really falls short. Why? It's not culturist. The full title is Glittering Images, A Journey Through Art from Egypt to Star Wars. The title says Egypt, right? So it's explicitly globalist. It's not culturist, it's globalist, which is the flip side of multiculturalism, saying that the West has no particular culture, that our history is everybody's history. Painfully, from this globalist perspective, you're not a citizen of the West learning about your glorious heritage and how to carry it on, being proud. You're just some anonymous person disconnected in the world looking at random art that could belong to anybody. That is not culturist art history. That's not what we need. So let's look at some of the beautiful images that she talks about and describes pretty well. This is an icon of St. John Chrysostom, a major Christian figure. And Paglia tells us that icons were, quote-unquote, sacred images that functioned as protectors of people and cities. In portable wood form, icons were carried by armies into battles, end quote. In this icon, she writes, we see his quote-unquote, implacable intensity of gaze, end quote. Now, I like it, but I want more culturism. Paglia only incidentally mentions that this icon is in Hagia Sophia, a major church that was turned into a mosque when the Muslims sacked Constantinople. In fact, it stands here. From a culturist point of view, the battle between Islam and the West is still going on. That means that this well-placed icon should still serve as a protector of people that could be carried by armies into battle. Though captured, the icon's defiantly continuing to exist in Muslim territory makes it an inspiration. What Paglia calls John's intensity of gaze is exactly the pose we need now. This is not a historic relic. It is a model of seriousness and defiance for contemporary Western culturists. Again, don't get me wrong, I think that Paglia provides some wonderful insight. Take a look at Titian's 1555 Venus with a Mirror. Now, I didn't know what to think of it, but Paglia suggests that the cherubs could be her babies, making this image maternal. Thus, she suggests it, quote-unquote, blurs the lines between the erotic and the maternal, perhaps revealing the deepest truth about heterosexuality, end quote. Wow! Then, looking at it, I noticed that the eye in the mirror is startled and older looking than that of Venus. Her insights gave what I noticed more meaning. So again, Paglia provides some great insight and helps us see that this painting is really deep. But it would mean more to me if she were to make it culturist art history criticism. If she would note that this is in stark contrast to Islam's total ban on art. If she would note that it's in stark contrast to China's boring, static tradition of art that hardly has any people in it. We get a much better example of culturist historical art criticism in the BBC's 13-episode 1969 Survey of Western Art Civilization by Kenneth Clark. Civilization, just like with Paglia's title, the name says it all. And when he's discussing the invention of perspective by the West, he asks an incredibly clear culturist question that Paglia should be asking.
But has it anything to do with civilization? Well, when it was first invented, I think it had. The belief that one could represent man in a real setting and calculate his position and arrange figures in a demonstrably harmonious order. This belief expressed, symbolically, a new idea about man's place in the scheme of things and man's control over his own destiny.
Now, thankfully, Paglia does fill nearly half of her book with descriptions of classical Western art. Yet, as all Western art historians, she must, unfortunately, transition to modernist trash and address this change. Everyone agrees that this transition started with the Impressionist rejection of the French Academy's authority. And following the standard modern art history narrative, Paglia tells us that the State Academy only supported ancient myths, Bible stories, and glorious episodes of French history in polished neoclassical style. And so, they deserve dismissal. By contrast, in episode 4 of Civilization, Clark says,
As I've said before, all the great ages of civilization have seen themselves as part of history, both as heirs and as transmitters.
And, tellingly, Clark only discusses modernism in the very last episode of his series and then largely ignores it. And even Paglia herself shows some skepticism towards modernism, calling it sometimes pointless and apropos for, quote, hotels, office buildings, and doctors' waiting rooms, end quote. Quite. Modernist garbage fits in offices because it helps convince Western globalists that they belong to no particular civilization. And they fit well into doctors' offices because now that the West is culturally fractured, any overt signs of Western culture might offend an outsider. It's sad. And again, Paglia does feature some important classical images, but following the lead of museums selling these classical images by association, she then too quickly transitions to trite modern trash that increasingly is not only not worthy of the West, but anti-Western. This photoshopped complaint is Renee Cox's 1998 Chillin' with Liberty. With super annoying virtue signaling, Paglia summarizes her discussion of Cox's work with the words, Raje's masked face and penetrating eyes suggest she is contemplating and transcending centuries of atrocity and suffering. The crime of slavery remains America's incurable headache. Like a warrior born from the goddess's brow, Rajay is welcoming the future, but forgetting nothing. Unfortunately, as the Puritans would tell you, liberty cannot be sustained by complaining or chillin'. But only a culturist art historian would make that kind of observation. The last piece we'll look at from Paglia's book is Pablo Picasso's 1907 Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, which, as these were whores he knew, Picasso just called My Brothel. She says the brothel recapitulates art history. On the left, we have Egyptian art. Then several Western works are referenced, and finally, on the right, we see the modern inclusion of scarified tribal masks from Africa. And, while as a globalist art historian, she praises the masked inclusion, violence, and reference to blood sacrifice. As a culturist, I see it as degeneracy and decline. And as a culturist, I can use art and the work of art historians like Paglia to help me make this claim. As she says of Picasso, in real life, one woman would never be enough for him. He had to rip through the veils of personality to capture the woman's essence, which always eluded him. Compare the Picasso quote Paglia included to John Chrysostom's intensity of gaze. Or compare it to Clark's description of 15th century Florentines.
What characters they are, morally and intellectually men of weight, the least frivolous of men, infinitely remote from the gay courtiers of Jean de Berry, who were only 30 years older. They have that air of contained vitality and confidence that one often finds in the founding fathers of a civilization.
Lastly, though it's not in Paglia's book, let's look at Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. I want to include it here because it illustrates the culturist technique of using the past, in this case art, to guide ourselves. Rather than global, this piece is Christian. It's clearly not Islamic or Asian. It thereby undermines the multiculturalist by showing that we do have a Western culture. And it destroys the leftist myth that Western history is nothing but exploitation and horror. The chapel is glorious. Finally, as a culturist art historian, I love the Sistine Chapel as it helps us to estimate the level of our current art and culture. If you compare a modern piece to the chapel, you can tell if the West is ascending or turning to trash. Such is the usefulness of culturist art history. And really finally, the West should celebrate its long tradition of culturist art criticism, starting with Plato, who always asked if art was moral before calling it good, all the way through to Matthew Arnold, the first art critic to be called a culturist practicing culturism and beyond. Certainly, the West has a long, proud tradition of culturist art criticism to tap into. This has been Culturist John. Thanks for watching. Bye.